Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to today's meditation. My name's Milla, and I'm the Sangha person for you this week. So lovely to see you again if you've been here most of the week, and welcome if this is you for the first time. This week I'm sharing on the themes of the breath, the body, and connection. And as ever, I offer it in the spirit of invitation, so feel free to take up as much or as little as you like. And also in the spirit of experimentation, so trying things out and then using our discernment to see, is this useful to do again? And reflection, helping us on that path of discernment. And we might do a little bit of reflecting together, for instance, through the chat, on how you're doing or how things have landed for you in practice, or your responses to any of the ideas that I share. I'm based in East London. I'm back home now. I've been sort of traveling this week. So that's very nice to be back home. And most of my work is not really so much around Dharma teaching or meditation teaching, but working with charities to help them run better, and also working with people organizing to disrupt harmful power, to support them and to participate in that. So that's where I'm coming from. And as ever, I'm just going to double check with you if my sound is good, because I'm moving around quite a bit, so feel free to let me know in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. Yeah, so today, like most days, I'll share a little bit, a few ideas, then I'll share some guided practice. And today, again, I'll leave plenty of time for silent practice together. I think that's really precious to be able to carve that out in the day, and even within a session like this. And then we'll have time for questions and shared reflections over the chat. And also in person, there are ways for you to come on screen if anyone would like to do that. And I see my role as holding this space for this hour, sort of being the person at the notional front of the room in the hall, providing some prompts or some potential shaping ideas, some perspectives as they've occurred to me, so that into this held space, or within this held space, your practice can unfurl, your practice can flourish and thrive, and your experiments can take place, and your discernment. So I'll do my best to offer some shaping and to be here with you all, and also to get out of the way of your practice to allow that to happen as much as possible. All right. Looks like the sound is good. Okay, wonderful. So, I wonder how you're doing today. I hope you're well. I'm mostly well. I had some pain in the night, and I just mentioned that because I know there's people here who've also been suffering with pain, whether intermittent or chronic. And just to name that, just to make sure that it's welcome in the space. So I feel a little bit fuzzy, if I'm honest, but I'm also not in pain right now. All right, so breath, body, connection. So far this week, more or less spent a day on each of these, and the ways that they themselves are connected. This idea that through the breath, through the body, and particularly this wonderful skill of steady embodied attention, we can find a closer and a clearer intimacy with our experience. And given that we know the world through our experience, a clear and intimate contact with our experience can enable a clearer and more intimate contact with the world. That's the broad thesis, I guess. And today I'd like to develop it a bit into some more into this idea of relationship and interconnection. Because in my view, because we're made of relationships, our fundamental nature is interrelated. That means, for me anyway, in the way I see things, that the quality of our relationships is the quality of our world or our lives. I hope that makes sense. Whether that's relationships we have inwardly, with our breath or emotions or different parts of our body, or the different characters that seemingly emerge inside ourselves, or whether that's our relationships kind of socially, economically, in terms of the big structures in which we live, and interpersonally. So if we're made of relationships, then thinking about what makes a good or a useful or a helpful or a vibrant or a flourishing relationship can, I think, be very fruitful. And I think in the context of this practice, this form of meditation practice and the Vipassana in the contemporary global north, in the culture that emerges through these practices and the institutions that spring up around them, I think there are some interesting traps that people can fall into that I've certainly come across. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of that around the theme of boundaries. So that was a fairly long preamble to get us to the idea of boundaries. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. So some ideas and practices read really, I think, in a very straightforward way from our practice to our lives. And steady embodied attention is a great example of this. It's useful in our practice, it's foundational in our practice, according to the texts and according to the way many of us have been taught. And it's useful in wider life, as kind of I've been reflecting on this week. But others are kind of less directly transferable. And I think in the attempt to transfer things we practice or think about or do or cultivate on the cushion, in the attempt to transfer that, sometimes if there's a nuance missing, things can get a bit tangled. We can end up with near enemies. I love this idea in the tradition of near enemies. These are characteristics that we inadvertently express while we're trying to do something different, and that can get in the way. So an example would be compassion. The near enemy of compassion is pity. Or sentimentality. The near enemy of kindness might be niceness. And the near enemy of equanimity is sometimes described as indifference. So as an example, I was assisting at a retreat last year at Gaia House. Maybe some of you were there. One of the questions that came up a few times for people in the one-to-ones that I was holding was around holding boundaries with others in their lives. And I spoke to a couple of people who felt some distress about their self-perceived inability to accept another person's harmful behavior. And I think that's what I mean by this near enemy emerging as we transfer from the cushion to life. So sometimes we might practice with accepting whatever comes in terms of thoughts or comfortable things, uncomfortable things, difficulties and joy in the context of the meditation practice. And I think it can be possible to then read across into life that we just sort of accept everything. And so one person that I'm thinking of had somehow kind of internalized this message from formal practice that all challenges should be met with quiet, loving acceptance. Quiet, loving acceptance. So when in her interpersonal life, like someone was bullying her, she really wanted to stay open and connected, to have full contact with that person, and felt really confused. And actually ended up blaming herself for not being kind of Buddhist enough or nice enough or strong enough or good enough. So sure, some forms of openness would be helpful. Openness to her own feelings, or even openness to the deeper needs of the person who was behaving poorly towards her, who was doing harmful behavior. But not complete openness and acceptance of the harmful behavior. And in fact, this is could be seen as rather unhelpful, like certainly to herself and even to the person who is being cruel. So maybe there's here some room for some nuance, to have openness in some ways, but also the ability to have boundaries, almost like we have like our skin, or like a cell wall can be open to let some things through, but also when needed can close. So combining openness to the reality of what's happening, not pretending it's not there, but setting boundaries around behavior or closeness or communication style to enable shared dignity and flourishing. So I might describe the near enemy of openness as overvaluing openness. Sometimes talk about valorizing openness or valorizing one value over another, which gives us a kind of hyper porousness, which can undermine the quality of our relationships, which make up the quality of our lives. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that being ethical and being ethical in a Buddhist way, being kind, doesn't necessarily mean being nice. Setting boundaries and saying no can be a really great way of caring for ourselves and others. Finding that balance between how open we are and how boundaried we are, and where we set boundaries. There's a lovely phrase I've heard that the place to set the boundary is the place where I can love you and me equally. And for some people, that might be quite far away, or for some things or situations. Like a cell wall is discerning, letting in nutrients, keeping out poisons. They don't let everything in and out. And we can also be discerning, calibrating, choosing, not necessarily allowing everything in the same way that in practice we move towards a fairly universal contact and allowing. So lots more I could say about boundaries and about near enemies. I find it really fascinating in the context of practice and life. But I think that's probably enough for now. So we'll take a little bit this idea of boundaries and how valuable they are, how useful they can be into the practice. So feel free to prepare yourself, however you're going to practice, whether you're standing or moving, sitting or lying down. Feel free to make any movements, stretches, anything that will help you settle and transition. Maybe a few slightly deeper than usual breaths or sighs, or breaths with a slightly longer than usual pause at the bottom of the out-breath. And starting with gratitude for everyone who's enabled our practice today. Whether that is teachers that we know and their teachers, going all the way back to the Buddha and many others. Whether it's their supporters and peers and friends and people who've helped them to allow their practice to flourish. So back in time, across time, and across space. This transfer of techniques and skills and ideas and people and relationships that create this web, which can then create the space for us, and how this can also flow forward and sideways from us in our lives, forward in time to those that we may share with in terms of practice. The way I'm sharing with you right now, and across the way we may support others or receive support from other people in our lives. People that we know, people that we don't know. Seen and unseen supporters of our lives and our practice. Known and unknown. Sending gratitude in all directions for this web of support and enabling. And seeing what an honor and a privilege is to step onto the mat and sit down on the cushion, and to meet that moment with dedication and commitment and joy. Settling yourself physically, mentally, emotionally. Perhaps bringing your attention to the places where your body is meeting the ground, or the seat, or wherever you're situated. Allowing your attention to come to this place where your body and the earth are interacting because of gravity. Finding a mixture of groundedness and dignity, settledness and openness in your posture, and in your breathing. And if you like, for this practice or for part of this practice, bringing your attention to a bodily boundary. This could be your skin, your eyes, something internal, like a joint, or part of your circulation system. Just noticing this balance of strength and discernment, this ability to let things through and to hold things. Balance between entering and leaving. Useful separations that keep you alive. Keep you and your practice thriving. Perhaps you can sense into them how they feel, whichever boundary you've chosen. Some sensation. Or you can also rest with the contemplation of their role and wisdom. Noticing where you are in your practice. If a thought pattern or some other pattern has taken you away from your chosen practice, then noticing that, letting it be there, and moving your focus back to practice. Perhaps to the boundary that you chose, or perhaps expanding this concept, making the link between other boundaries, other beings that have them, trees, animals, other people in your life. This aspect of life that we share with so many other beings. Taking care of ourselves and each other. And we'll practice like this for the rest of the session. So welcome back. Transitioning now from silent sitting to some more reflection together. And please put any reflections on your practice or on anything that you like into the chat. It's really wonderful to build community in this way. And throughout this week, I've also been inviting you to take elements from the sessions or from your insights or your practice and experiment with dropping them into your day in some way. So if you did that at any point this week and you'd like to share about how that landed or what effect that had for you, it might be helpful for others in ways you can't imagine, and really encourage people to share any reflections. Also, of course, you can share questions for me, and I'll do my best to respond in the time we have left. So whether something was challenging or whether something was useful or good to you, feel free to share it. And to mention Dana as well, the platform Sangha Live runs on generosity, and sharing helps it to stay sustainable and to help teachers stay sustainable. And this week that also means some of the work I'm doing, particularly with two groups, one called Stop Polluting Politics, which is working to expose the links between fossil fuel money and the decisions our politicians are making. And then another, which is called CAN, which is about supporting the well-being and community and sort of nurture of activists in this space. Both very young, not very much online presence, but that's where I'll be kind of helping financially with the dana that you share this week. So I'm very open to your questions, to your reflections. And there's a teacher called Ethan Nichtern in the States. He's a pretty interesting person. And I was recently reading an article, and he was saying how some forms of individual green or environmental action can be considered the near enemy of climate activism, actually. So the classic example of this is recycling, how that can be the near enemy of making a difference to the climate crisis and to the environmental crisis in which we're, and also to the plastics in general, because the plastics companies are delighted if people recycle, because then people feel like, oh, I've done my bit, and they don't necessarily spend time organizing and talking with each other about why there's so much plastic in the first place, because those questions would actually affect the plastics companies. While if they push the responsibility for clearing up their mess onto individuals, and then individuals do nothing else, it's actually very good for them. So I thought that was a very interesting extension of this idea of the near enemy. Anyway, so I think Lois might be talking about Ethan Nichtern, and I will attempt to put his name in the chat, but I'm actually not getting the chat box up easily, so it might take me a minute. But if anyone else knows him, Ethan Nichtern. Okay. So Adam has asked, when talking about personal boundaries, if someone is verbally abusive towards you, how might you go about negating that and being able to self-regulate? Okay. So lots of techniques for those things. And I guess it really depends a lot on the situation. Because it depends how much trust there is between you and that person and how much both of you are invested in the future of the relationship. So, you know, if it's someone in the street who you're probably never going to see again, or if it's your boss, or if it's a family member or a friend, I think it would be very different. I'll try and say something useful. Also, you're welcome to put a little bit more specifics to help me. But you've asked two things, being able to self-regulate and then negating that. So being able to self-regulate, it'll be no surprise that I think mainly that's to do with steady embodied attention, starting with understanding what's happening, ideally before the situation or the emotions get over the kind of boiling point where it becomes very, very difficult to regulate. So we might become activated to a certain extent and we can respond. But then if we're activated over that, it's really hard to respond because so much else is going on. And so that's one of the many reasons why steady embodied attention is a great thing to train, so that we can notice. So for instance, I can notice when I'm in the, you know, irritated or upset zone where I can still respond, versus when I'm kind of too agitated to make a good response or a useful response. And in terms of kind of emergency regulation, personally, I think the breath and bringing the attention down to the ground. So whatever the lowest part of your body is, feeling your feet, for instance. So that would be to sort of an emergency regulation thing. And then also, if someone has been abusive towards you, to take care of the feelings within you. All of this may not be possible in the moment. Some of these might be longer term things. And then in terms of negating, yes, that's the man, Ethan Nickton. Negating, I'm not sure about negating, but maybe responding, I can talk about that, is to set a boundary. And depending on the relationship and the power balance between you, you may be able to set a strong boundary or a still effective but a less strong boundary. I'm sorry, I can't be really super explicit there because I don't really know enough. But some form of saying that is not okay. Is okay. And it can simply be the phrase, that is not okay. It is not okay to speak to me like that. How much they listen will depend very much on how much they care, and how invested they are in the future of the relationship and in their own dignity and in yours. So it's definitely not a magic bullet, but I would say noticing, emergency regulation, taking care of yourself, and then saying no in a way that feels appropriate. Lots more to say on that. All right. Thank you for your reflections. And I'm also going to try and find the Dana link and link to my website in case anyone wants to continue conversations with me. A couple of people have, and I do offer, you know, one-to-ones. I'm going to try and put those in the chat while I'm looking at Kaz's question. What do I think of the idea of fierce compassion? Very happy about the idea of fierce compassion. I think it's wonderful. In case people aren't familiar, it's the idea, I'm not sure where it's originally from, but it's certainly developed very much in mindful self-compassion practices. Kristin Neff, I think, is someone who's done a lot of work around that. And the idea that we have gentle compassion, which might be what most people think of around compassion, like a kind of wish to care for the other when they're in pain, in a kind of holding, embracing, really gentle way, a contactful way. And then fierce compassion, which can have the same sort of framing. So it can still be because we feel that the other person is suffering or causing suffering in some way, not in a good place. But the response might not be to embrace, it might be to say no, or to stop them doing what they're doing. And whilst this isn't a perfect metaphor by a long way, one metaphor that could be used is like a grandmother taking care of a toddler, taking the toddler to a park, and the toddler starts, hitting another child on the head. And the grandmother doesn't love the toddler any less. Grandmother also doesn't get involved or start trying to understand what the fight is, but the grandmother can separate the children and can say, no, that's suffering for you, that's suffering for them, that's not allowed. And sometimes, again, very much stretching the metaphor, I think of the work of activism and the work of challenging harmful power as being taking care of our systems, our shared systems, almost like our systems are immature. Like the way we allow power to be held and used is like a toddler. Not that necessarily the people involved are like toddlers, but that the system is like a toddler. And we can say, this system is really harmful and ignorant, and it is causing much more harm than good. And so we're going to intervene. Sometimes I think of it a bit like that. Savina says, do you think one should be nice even when a boundary is crossed? I'm guessing that B means boundary. Again, a little bit like with Adam's question, it kind of depends on the boundary. I mean, the relationship. So I don't really make a distinction between holding a boundary and, I mean, I think you can be kind and hold a boundary, is I guess how I'd respond to that. And I don't think that being nice is something to worry about. I think the worry about being nice causes more harm than good. I think there's a lot to unpack there, like why we think we should be nice, who's been socialized to be nice, who has to be nice, or they'll be admonished. There's a lot of stuff underneath that. And in general, I think it's really useful to very much question this idea of nice. But if we think instead about kindness, I think one can set a boundary with kindness. And with firmness, with gentle compassion or with fierce compassion. So yeah, I would question all upholding of niceness as a main value. Certainly it can be in there in the mix. I'm still really struggling to find the chat bar, but I'm going to try one more time to put the Dana link in. No, unfortunately it's not coming up for me. But if anyone does have it and would like to, that would be appreciated. And I hope you have a wonderful day and can find a way to drop something you've discovered in your practice into your day. I really enjoyed your reflections and questions, and I look forward perhaps to seeing you tomorrow or in the future.